push myself to do something that I know is not smart and that I know is not safe, right? Or I'm going to try to like hide this injury or like lie to the doctors, right? Because I don't want to let people down.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to part 3 of my conversation with Patrick O'Keefe. Now, he shared a lot about his experiences as an athlete and in the military, but here in part 3, we talk all about the mental health side of injuries and how he's had experience in both chapters of his life. We discuss breaking down that stigma of seeking help, and then we both open up about our fears of starting something new or putting ourselves out there, me with this podcast and him with some other things in his life where we were so worried about what other people might think and how that held us back for a while. But we learned if it helps just one person, hell, why not do it? Again, we cover a lot and we do talk about some really serious topics. I do want to put out another disclaimer or sort of a trigger warning as we do discuss some issues around veteran suicide. So just as a forewarning in case there's anyone out there that this topic may not be as comfortable for you to hear about. Also, I do want to mention that in this episode, I talk about an organization called TAPS, which stands for the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And it's an awesome nonprofit that I used to work for, and they care for military families of the fallen. And they do some really great work for families who have lost a loved one. So we cover that and a wide range of other topics. So thanks for tuning in, and here's the rest of my conversation with Patrick O'Keefe. Being part of a team, having that camaraderie, how much that helps, but also there's another side of that where as much as you can open up with your teammates, there's still a little bit of a stigma within the military with sharing your feelings or talking about if you went through something tough, or whether it's an injury or something mentally. Did you have any experiences specifically with that?
Yeah, so like there's definitely two like sides of it, right? There's the physical side and then there's like the mental side. The Army's gotten better at dealing with this stuff, right? But there still is just like on the physical side, right? Some of it makes sense because there's supposed to be this culture of like, hey, that like if the balloon goes up tomorrow, right, and all of a sudden we're at war with Russia or something, or Iran, like, and everyone needs to go. If you're like injured, you can't go, And so very much like on a sports team, like I'm sure with all your concussions and stuff, like, like feeling like, oh man, I'm letting the team down, right? Like, and so I'm going to push myself to do something that I know is not smart and that I know is not safe, right? Or I'm going to try to like hide this injury or like lie to the doctors, right? Because I don't want to let people down.
Exactly.
And then it's like reinforced by this weird thing of like people being like, yeah, you are letting people down, right? Like some of the mentality of some people that's like, yeah, if you're injured, like thanks for nothing, right? Like
You're like, I didn't choose this. I didn't choose to be hurt.
Yeah, exactly. And the unfortunate side of things is because like unlike a sports team where everyone wants to be there, right? Like there is a small percentage of people in the military who, for one reason or the other, whether it's not what they thought it was going to be, or they're just fed up with serving, right? Like some people do like fake injuries to get out of stuff, right? To get out of training or to get out of deploying or to get out of the military, right? Like, and again, it's a very small percentage, but it's that classic thing where it's like people will use those small percentages to like justify being weird about all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's like a very real pressure from some people that's like, if you're injured, you can't do your job. So like, and sometimes you only get like one shot at like doing a specific job in the military. And so people will be like, hey, I'm just not going to say anything, right? I'm gonna like tough it out, right? And like I'm gonna not like go and get help because I don't want to lose this position that I've earned, right?
And that you've worked years for and has meant so much to you, and people rely on you.
Yeah. And so some stuff like will go on for years, right? And it's not until like people are getting out of the military and doing their final like physicals for all their benefits and stuff that it really gets dealt with, which is not the way, right? Like we should be doing things, like, and so the Army has tried to get better with that. Like they do like the types of stuff that you experience like on a sports team. Athletic trainers, right? They have physical therapists, they have orthopedics, and like to treat it more like an athlete thing rather than, something else. But there's still those people that, because they've been in the military for so long, right? Like it's still that stigma of like, don't get injured, right? Like,
Yeah.
because then you're fucked. um, so even like me, I tried to push really hard, like, hey, if you get hurt, take the time to heal. When I was a commander, right, like one of the NCOs who was a platoon sergeant in my company tore his ACL. And he was like very freaked out, because like he'd been in the Army, for like 15, 16 years, right? And like he was like, I don't want to lose my platoon sergeant job. And I was like, we were getting ready to go to NTC and the unit was going to deploy to Korea. And he was like, I don't want to lose my job, And I was like, look, like, you can't go to NTC. And if you go to NTC, you'll probably get more hurt and then you won't go to Korea, right? Which is like a bigger deal than missing NTC. Um, so I tried to be like very like supportive in that way. But then like if I ever got hurt, it was always like, I'm just not going to say anything, right? Like, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna, I'm just gonna like take it light for like a couple days, or like a week or 2 weeks, right? And like try to hide somewhere, like during
Yeah.
PT, and like do something easy so I can try to rehab on my own, right? Because it's like, if I go to the military doctor and they find something seriously wrong, it's gonna be in my file forever.
Yeah. It's
Never
so
go
funny
away.
how easy it is to give advice to other people, and you always know what the right thing is to do. And
Yes,
you want to help someone else. Like that's the nature of your
100%.
job. You know the right thing to do. So you tell someone you care about, a teammate, someone within your platoon, whatever it is, you tell them the right thing to do, but then when it happens to you and you're like, actually,
Yeah, like I feel like that's a super athlete like response.
yeah, it's your job, and
Yeah,
the fact if you have a job that is reliant on your physical status, you can't let anything be broken because you need to be able to do your
yeah.
job.
And then on the mental side, right, like the rate of veteran suicide, right, is one of those things that pretty well known, which like the Army has tried to address like through a lot of programs and stuff, and trying to take the stigma away from like seeking help. But that's something too that honestly, there's it's probably less spoken now, but there is still kind of that stigma of like, oh, like don't talk about your feelings, right? Like, or like, hey, if you're going to go to mental health to go talk to somebody, uh, you're weak, right? So it's something that it really has to be like a leadership thing. Like leaders have to be the ones who are like, this is okay, and then they need to be like transparent about it, right? Like I failed, right? Like as a commander in being transparent about stuff like my own injuries. But like looking back, right, it probably would have been much more effective for breaking the stigma about physical stuff if I had like been open with everybody and been like, hey, like I got hurt and I'm going to go see like the PT and the orthopedic on post, right? And like these are my appointments, right? Like these are the things I'm going to miss for it, because then, right, like everyone can look and see like, oh, my boss is doing this, so it must be okay. And so
Yeah.
that's one thing, I wish like looking back that I had done, but I mean that's like the stuff that I feel like it's going to take, like both with physical and mental stuff to really like break that stigma down. Because if it's like, hey, my boss is just like this iron person who like never gets hurt, right, and like never never has any issues, right, it's like, well, I have to be like that too, which is not the intent.
That's a really good point. And like you said, like there's only so many programs and brochures and talks that people can have about, be open about your mental health. It's only until something personal, whether it's someone you look up to or someone you're close with, they open up about it, then you can feel more comfortable about opening up about your
Yeah.
own issues. I think that is what makes you feel like you're in a safe space. It That's the same thing with sports and injury in that sense. And I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
times it just takes your teammates that you're so close with going through all this stuff together. Did you ever have
Right.
someone you looked up to that opened up to you and made you feel more comfortable, or is that something you felt like you wish you would have had?
I mean, so like being like as a leader, you tell people like, hey, like you can always come and talk like about stuff. And so, and like, leaders above me for the most part, right? Like I've had a good like a pretty good number of good leaders, a few bad ones, right? But luckily, tours in the military aren't that long, so either you leave or they leave. But and one of the big things is have an open door policy, right? Like anyone can come in and talk about anything at any time. And so that for sure has always been a big like blessing to have, right? Like in good leaders, people who really you can like go and like talk to about like literally anything. And like having people come to me like when I was a commander and stuff, like being able to like give back and stuff, and kind of like help. That was something where I felt like I'm glad I'm able to do this, right? And like even if who knows if my advice is any good, right? But like
Yeah.
maybe it makes them feel better. One thing that really like kind of shook the whole foundation was I had this first sergeant who was awesome, right? Like he was like the poster child on recruiting posters. Like this is the guy you would have seen, like
Yeah.
super fit, right? Super smart. Like he'd been promoted like early all through like the ranks and stuff, super successful. And like every time I saw him, he was like, huge smile, right? Like super awesome, right? And then, a couple months ago, right? Like we woke up and he had shot himself. It was just that real, like, kind of like reality check that like, hey, like it can literally happen to anybody, right? And like, who knows what was going on? It's one of those things like, man, like I wish that I had like reached out more or like dug deeper rather than just like, hey, how's it going? Like everything's great, right? And then just like talking about like random stuff. You really do never know like what somebody's going through. It's even more important to like have what you were saying, right? Like people that you can just like talk to and then at the same time like break down the stigmas about like talking about your feelings and like all that stuff, because it's I feel like everyone always says that like it's always the people you don't expect. It's like, well, how do we like expect this then, right? Like what do we do?
I mean, when I worked at TAPS, I mean, I didn't have a lot of direct relationship with a lot of these people prior to, but you talk to a lot of families who went through something like this, and for someone like me that I was never exposed to a lot of that, I always saw like we talked about the positive sides of the military and all the great things, and then working at TAPS, I was exposed to a little bit more of that dark side.
Yeah, like the trauma side of
Mm-hmm.
the last 19 years or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good that there's places like TAPS and other organizations that are there to comfort the families, but you don't want them to get to that point. You want there to be maybe something in place where it keeps creating safe spaces for people to talk about.
Yeah, that whole thing, like I think we like briefly discussed it, but and I still haven't watched it yet, right? But the Michael Phelps thing on HBO about like athletes, and he talks about Olympians, but I feel like that's that like loss and like that oh, I'm gonna like base my whole life around this thing, and then all of a sudden it's like taken away from me, or it's over because I'm too old or whatever, right? Like I feel like it's more prevalent in a lot of different like parts of society than we probably give it like credit for.
It's that change of identity, or like that loss of identity, where the only way I can relate to it personally is through sports, but it also applies to the military, applies to, I mean, people going through other major changes, but like you identify as something your entire life. Like when someone asks me like, tell me about yourself, like, oh, I'm a soccer player. And then once that ended, I'm like, oh, I'm tall. I'm tall. I don't know. Who am I? And so it's scary to make those transitions into, like, it sounds deep, but like finding your identity. And you feel lost when you don't have a sense of direction anymore. And I feel like with the military, the great part about the military is what I'm jealous of is you're kind of told what to do. You're not really making a lot of your own decisions, which is good and bad, but you're on a path and you're told what to do, which is kind of nice, because sometimes I wish someone would just tell me what the heck I'm supposed to do.
This is where you're moving. This is how long you're going to be here. This is what you're going to work every day. Sometimes this is what you eat.
And you're going to like it. Okay. And that's
or you get nothing.
But that's where I feel like I know my parents are struggling with helping Katie and I, where my mom was a doctor. She kind of had a clear path going to med school. It wasn't perfectly clear, but she had a pretty clear path. And then my dad being in the military, pretty clear path as well. And so now someone, just a rando like me with no clear path, it's hard for them to, help guide us. What are some of your goals right now? Like what's really important to you right now?
So, like professionally, I've definitely reached the point, right, where, I'm sure that the Army is like what I want to do as a career, right? Like for as long as the Army will keep promoting me, right? And not say like, okay, it's time for you to leave, right? Like we've put up with your antics for long enough. There's like specific jobs and stuff, and it's all like very technical stuff, right? That would probably bore you and anyone listening to this. It can be kind of weird in the military too, because you change jobs like so rapidly. Like when you really think about it, like
Within 24 hours, you're on a helicopter.
exactly right. Like and it doesn't last that long, like I was a platoon leader for like 18 months, and then I was an XO, which is like a second in command, like logistics guy. I did that for like a year. Then I went to school for like 7 months. I was a commander for 18 months, and like now I'm doing this job. Like I feel like I'm fairly ambitious, right? And like I want to get to the next thing, and I want to like move up. Looking back, like when I first joined the military, like it was all like, hey, like how am I gonna get like the coolest job, right? Or like the best job, like all these things. Like I'm gonna compete for this stuff and like get awards, like all these other things. Right? I want to be like the best guy, right? Like, but like over the past like 8.5 years, right? Like that stuff like falls away. You look back and it's like it's not important, right? Like it's just not like it doesn't have a whole lot of value. That they don't like define my career, right? Like you get your evaluations and then it's like cool, like what have you done for me lately, right? Like in your next job, like I don't care who you were like in your last unit, like
Yeah.
you're a nobody now, like what can you do for me, right? And like that can be kind of jarring, but like what I've realized is that like when people that I've served with, right, or like people that I've led in particular, like will hit me up like on Facebook, right, or a text or something, or a phone call, and just be like, hey sir, like I was thinking about you, right, like thanks for doing this for me, like thanks for doing that, like thanks for being a great leader, like hopefully I can serve in the future. Like that's the stuff that out of the past like 8.5 years, like that's the stuff that's stuck with me the most, and the stuff that's like meant the most to me. Like that's what really defines my service. Not to get like all like like weird about it, right? But like looking back, like that's the stuff that's really going to mean a lot to me. And when I look back on my career, right, like those relationships and like the impact that hopefully I've been able to have like on the people that I led like lives and stuff, like that's what's going to give like meaning to my career. Like it's not like the jobs I held or like the awards that I got or like any of that stuff. So that's something that I've kind of like realized.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to relationships and the people that you surround yourself with, and having that perspective that it's not about the number on your check, like how much money you're making or the title. It really
Yeah.
does come down to, the people that you work with. And so it's cool that not that you just now came to that realization. Good job. No, but
It's really about the friends you made along the way.
you're like, I just realized this yesterday that it's like kind of cool to have friends. Let me know how it is because I have no idea. I really do appreciate you sharing all your stories and your insight and your journey. And yeah, this was awesome.
Your podcast is good. So
This is
like,
recorded. I have it on tape. He said it was good. No, it's all about the
no, yeah, I
guests.
mean, it on the surface, right? It might seem like it's about sports, right? It's about an injury, right? And about like the whole like identity thing that you're kind of talking about, right? Like what do I do now, right? And like, but because like I texted you after it, just for everyone to understand the context, right? But it's like there's a lot of those things that you can like pull out, like that are like so very relatable, like across a lot of different spectrums, right? Because while the details may change, right, a lot of the underlying kind of themes and like what people are going through can remain the same, like in a lot of different situations. So
Yeah.
that's why I thought it was like really interesting, because it was like I never played a D1 sport, right? Like sports were like I had fun playing sports, but they were never like the most important thing in my life. But all that stuff you guys were talking about still like resonated with me from a totally different angle, right? So it was
That means a lot because I've been really hesitant to start this. I've actually been wanting to start it for a while, but I've been hesitant to start it just because you get so caught up with the idea that everyone and their mother's doing a podcast. There's 500 million out there, and
yeah,
who's going to listen to mine? But I told myself, like, I kind of just want to do this for me. And if something
yeah.
comes out of it, if someone relates to it, finds comfort in it, if one single person does, then awesome.
In the military, just like any profession, right? There's like professional journals. I wrote an article recently that's saying like published in the fall, right? Like about it's all Army stuff, but like it was the same thing, right? Like it was like I had wanted to write something for a while, but I was like, nobody's gonna read it, right? Like nobody cares what I think, right? But it's the
Right.
same thing, right? Like if I have something to say, like if it helps one person, then why not do it, right? Because then that one person, that one unit, right, like that you may have reached, isn't gonna have that thing, right? And just like, yeah, I think it's just borne out by what you said that like no matter what the feedback is, if it gets to anybody, right? Like it's definitely worthwhile.
All right, that is a wrap on my conversation with Patrick. So, thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. And shout out to Patrick for sharing his crazy, intense, scary, and I guess funny stories. He's got a few of those. But thanks again to Patrick and to all of you for tuning in. Until next time.